I am Joshua, 28 years old, and my parents ignored me for years. At Christmas dinner, I casually said I sold my company. My brother laughed and called it a worthless business. When I told him the price was $170 million, his jaw fell, and my mom turned pale. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect little illusion, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The dining room was suffocatingly warm, smelling heavily of roasted garlic, expensive red wine, and the overpowering pine scent of my mother's elaborate Christmas centerpieces. I sat at the far end of the long oak table, pushing a piece of glazed ham around my mismatched plate. I was placed right next to the swinging kitchen door, the designated spot for whoever was expected to clear the dishes and fetch extra napkins. In my family, that person was always me. To my left, my father, Matthew, leaned back in his velvet-upholstered chair. He was swirling a glass of Cabernet, nodding along with rapt attention as my older brother, Mason, held court. Mason sat dead center, the guest of honor. He wore a crisp, tailored button-down shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and a heavy silver watch that he made sure to flash every time he gestured. Next to him sat his fiancée, Jessica, looking polished and politely attentive. Across from them were my Uncle Wyatt and my former co-worker, Luke. My mother, Mary, sat at the head of the table closest to Mason, her eyes crinkling with absolute adoration every time Mason opened his mouth. The entire evening was a monument to Mason. We were supposedly gathered for Christmas, but the digital invitation my mother sent to the family group chat literally read, "Special holiday dinner celebrating Mason's massive promotion." Mason was mid-story, humble bragging about his new title at the investment firm. "It is a lot of pressure, honestly," Mason said, taking a slow sip of his wine. "Managing that kind of portfolio, dealing with the senior partners. But you know how it is. You put in the hours, you show the killer instinct, and the rewards follow." My father beamed. "You have always had that instinct, Mason. We always knew you were destined for the top floor." Uncle Wyatt chimed in, pointing his fork at Mason. "Exactly right. You have to build wealth, Mason. I was just dealing with a client's messy divorce last week, and let me tell you, when you have assets, you have power. You don't want to end up fighting over scraps in custody battles or splitting a mediocre pension. You want to build a legacy, an inheritance you can actually be proud of." I sat quietly, chewing my food, letting their voices wash over me like the familiar, irritating hum of a broken refrigerator. I was used to this. I was the background noise. I was the responsible, practical kid who chose nursing. To them, I was a saintly but financially irrelevant supporting character in the grand play of Mason's life. Then the conversation shifted. Mason's eyes drifted down the table and landed on me. The fake humility vanished from his face, replaced by that sharp, competitive smirk he always wore when he wanted to elevate himself by stepping on my neck. "So, Joshua," Mason called out, making sure the entire table was listening. "Still pulling those brutal double shifts in the ER? Still eating stale crackers from the vending machine at 3 in the morning?" I looked up, meeting his gaze evenly. "The shifts are long, but the work is important, Mason." Luke snorted into his beer. "Important until you burn out, man. I don't miss those fluorescent hospital lights one bit." Mason chuckled, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the mahogany table. "You really need to get out of that grind, little brother. Maybe someday I can get you an entry-level interview at my firm, if you clean up a bit and take a business course." My mother smiled nervously, trying to keep the peace but clearly siding with Mason. "Now, Mason, nursing is a wonderful profession. Joshua's salary pays his rent. He is our practical kid. The one we never have to worry about." That phrase, "the one we never have to worry about," it was their favorite excuse. It meant I required no emotional investment, no financial support, and no genuine interest. Sure. A salary is fine for some." Mason pressed on, refusing to let the spotlight move away from my perceived failures. "But what about that little app thing you were messing around with? The medical data project? Are you still asking the universe to manifest $1 million? How is your little worthless business going? He even used air quotes. Worthless. I stopped chewing. I placed my fork down on the porcelain plate. The clink echoed sharply in the room. I reached for my water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down. I looked Mason dead in the eye. I didn't scowl. I didn't raise my voice. I kept my face completely neutral, like I was delivering a weather report. I am not manifesting anything anymore, Mason, I said quietly. Mason let out a loud, theatrical laugh, looking around the table to invite the others to join in. Right? Okay, Mr. CEO, did you finally give up the tech fantasy? Or did you find someone dumb enough to buy it? And how much did your little worthless business go for? I let the silence hang for exactly 2 seconds. $170 million. The laughter died in Mason's throat. It didn't fade. It was severed instantly. The room went completely, terrifyingly silent. My mother's smile vanished, and the color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. My father's hand froze mid-air, his wine glass tilting dangerously. Uncle Wyatt's mouth fell open. Mason's jaw actually dropped. His eyes darted frantically across my face, searching for the punchline, searching for the smirk that would tell him I was just being petty. But there was no punchline. To understand the sheer, catastrophic weight of that silence, you have to understand the 28 years of history sitting underneath it. You have to understand what it takes to build an empire in the dark while the people who are supposed to love you are busy worshipping a false idol. You have to know what they did to me to make this moment so incredibly satisfying. Growing up as Joshua meant learning very early that love was not unconditional. Love in my house was a currency, and Mason hoarded all of it. I remember being 12 years old, standing in the kitchen with a blue ribbon from the regional science fair. I had spent 3 months building a working model of a renewable energy grid. I was so proud my hands were shaking. My father walked in from work, dropped his briefcase, and walked right past me to the living room, where Mason was sitting on the couch in his football jersey. Mason had scored a single touchdown in a junior varsity game that they lost by 20 points. My father swept Mason into a massive hug, yelling about how proud he was. Later that night, my mother took a photo of Mason in his dirty jersey, framed it, and hung it in the hallway. My science fair ribbon ended up in a drawer in the kitchen, buried under takeout menus. This dynamic was heavily encouraged by Uncle Wyatt. Wyatt was a financial advisor who treated life like a corporate ladder. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, Wyatt would sit in our living room, swirling scotch, and loudly analyze our futures. You have to focus your resources, Wyatt told my parents once, right in front of me when I was a teenager. Mason has the charisma. He has the killer instinct. He is going to be the rainmaker. Joshua is smart, sure, but he is too quiet. He will get a safe little salary, keep his head down, and be fine. But Mason is the one you build around. They absorbed Wyatt's toxic advice like it was gospel. When it came time for college, I didn't even bother asking for help. I busted my back studying, applied for every grant available, and secured a full academic scholarship to a highly competitive nursing program. When I brought the acceptance letter to my parents, my mother gave me a quick hug. "That is nice, honey. Nurses are so helpful." Then she turned immediately to ask Mason how his business fraternity rush was going. I chose the emergency room because I liked the chaos. I liked the pressure. In the ER, nobody cared about your charisma or your killer instinct. They cared if your hands were steady while you pushed meds into a crashing patient. They cared if you could think clearly when a family was crying in the waiting room, hoping they were planning a welcome home party and not a funeral. I worked night shifts, brutal 14-hour stretches of blood, adrenaline, and exhaustion. During those endless nights, I started noticing the systemic failures. Patients were waiting too long for critical scans. Lab results were getting lost in the shuffle between shift changes. Doctors and nurses were operating in dangerous silos because the hospital's internal software was an archaic nightmare. I started sketching out a solution on the back of triage sheets. I called my best friend, Elijah, a brilliant software engineer who hated corporate tech. Together, In my cramped, unheated apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer stubbornness, we started building Pulse Link. It was a real-time, cross-departmental coordination platform designed specifically for the extreme conditions of emergency medicine. We worked on it for 3 years. I would finish a brutal shift at the hospital, come home at 7 in the morning, shower the smell of iodine off my skin, and sit at my computer with Elijah to debug code until I passed out. My family knew none of this. To them, I was just a tired nurse who couldn't be bothered to show up to their Sunday brunches. The defining moment of our family fracture happened 2 years before the Christmas dinner. Pulse Link was at a critical juncture. We had a working prototype, but we needed to upgrade our server security to comply with federal medical data laws before we could even pitch it to a hospital. We needed $30,000. It wasn't a fortune, but on my nursing salary, it might as well have been $1 million. I swallowed my pride. I went to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat at their kitchen island, opened my laptop, and tried to show my father the dashboard. I explained the market gap. I explained the projected savings for hospitals. I asked them to co-sign a small business line of credit. I wasn't even asking for their money, just their signature. My father didn't look at the screen. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He slowly pushed the laptop screen down until it clicked shut. "Joshua, please be realistic," Matthew sighed heavily. "Apps are a fad. Everyone thinks they are the next Mark Zuckerberg. You have a solid job. Nursing is your backup plan, remember? It gives you a steady salary. Do not risk your financial stability and ours on some tech fantasy. We are not going to put our names on a gamble." I felt a cold knot form in my chest. I nodded, packed up my laptop, and left without another word. The very next afternoon, I stopped by their house to pick up some mail that had been delivered there. As I pulled up, I saw a gleaming, brand-new silver Porsche 911 parked in the driveway. Mason was leaning against the hood, wearing sunglasses, laughing while my mother took photos of him with her phone. I walked up the driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs. "New car?" I asked, my voice tight. My father walked out of the garage, wiping his hands on a towel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Well, Mason's firm requires him to project a certain image. You have to look successful to be successful. We dipped into the old college fund to help him with the down payment. It is an investment in his future." I stood there in the driveway, looking at the luxury sports car, realizing the brutal truth. My life-saving career was a backup plan. My business was a gamble. But Mason's ego was an investment. They had drained the college fund to buy a toy for the golden child, less than 24 hours after refusing to co-sign a loan that could have changed my life. I turned around, got into my rusted Honda, and drove away. I didn't cry. The sadness burned away, leaving behind a cold, indestructible core of pure determination. They didn't believe in me. Fine. I would build it without them. After the Porsche incident, I stopped trying to explain myself to my family. I went completely dark. Elijah and I scrambled for funding. Desperation is a dangerous cologne, and it attracts the worst kind of predators. Enter Dylan. Dylan was an old college acquaintance who had pivoted into venture capital. He drove a flashy car, wore tailored suits, and talked a big game about disrupting the healthcare space. He heard through the grapevine what Elijah and I were building and invited us to a high-end steakhouse downtown. Over expensive cuts of meat that he insisted on paying for, Dylan painted a beautiful picture. He offered us $50,000 in seed money to get our servers up to compliance. In exchange, he wanted a 20% equity stake. It sounded like a lifeline. I was so exhausted from working double shifts and coding all night that I almost signed the term sheet right there at the table. But working in the ER teaches you to trust your gut when a situation feels unstable. I took the contract to a cheap legal clinic the next morning. The pro bono lawyer highlighted a clause buried on page 14. Dylan hadn't structured an investment. He had structured a trap. If Pulse Link didn't hit an impossible revenue target within 12 months, the clause would trigger a hostile takeover, stripping Elijah and me of our intellectual property. Dylan was trying to steal my company. I set up a meeting with Dylan at a cheap diner. I slid the unsigned contract across the sticky laminate table. I am not signing this, Dylan. You can take your predatory term sheet and choke on it. Dylan's friendly mask slipped. His eyes turned cold. You are making a massive mistake, Joshua. You are a glorified bedpan cleaner playing in a league you don't understand. You will run out of money, and this little app will die on your hard drive. I stood up. Watch me, I said, and walked out. The betrayal stung, but it forced me to find another way. I realized I didn't need a venture capitalist. I needed a champion inside the system. Dr. Gabriel was the chief of emergency medicine at my hospital. He was a terrifying, brilliant man who cared about exactly two things: saving lives and efficiency. One Friday night, we got hit with a mass casualty event. A multi-car pileup on the interstate. The ER was a war zone. In the middle of the chaos, the hospital's internal server crashed. We were flying blind, relying on whiteboards and screaming across the hallways to track patient statuses. When the dust settled hours later, Dr. Gabriel was sitting in the break room, his face buried in his hands, furious about the communication breakdown that had nearly cost a patient their life. I walked in, opened my laptop, and placed it on the table in front of him. I built something that fixes this, I said. I ran a simulation of the exact scenario we had just survived, showing how PulseLink would have automatically tracked, triaged, and communicated every data point in real time. Dr. Gabriel stared at the screen for 10 minutes in complete silence. Then he looked up at me. I am authorizing a beta test for this department starting Monday. If it crashes, you are fired. If it works, I will personally shove it down the hospital board's throat. It worked. It worked flawlessly. Within 2 months, our ER wait times dropped by 30%. Patient transfer errors hit 0. The data was undeniable. Dr. Gabriel kept his promise. He presented PulseLink to the regional board, and suddenly my little worthless business was being licensed across 4 different hospitals. The revenue started coming in, but I kept working my nursing shifts. I kept my head down. I hired a sharp corporate lawyer named Julian to handle the licensing contracts. Then, 6 months ago, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar San Francisco number. Joshua? This is Mr. Carter, CEO of Apex Medical Solutions. The voice on the other end boomed. Apex was a titan in the healthcare software industry. Dr. Gabriel has been sharing your analytics with our acquisition team. We don't want to license PulseLink, Joshua. We want to buy it outright. We want to integrate it into our national network. When Mr. Carter named the preliminary figure, the air left my lungs. The negotiations took months. Julian, my lawyer, fought like a gladiator, driving the price up, securing equity in the parent company, and ensuring Elijah and I were protected. The final acquisition price was $170 million. I was sitting in Julian's glass-walled downtown office, staring at the final transfer documents, pen in hand. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from the family group chat. Family dinner next Friday. A special celebration for Mason's big promotion at the firm. So proud of our star. I stared at the screen. My mother didn't even ask if I was free. She demanded my presence to act as an audience member for Mason's life. Julian looked up from his paperwork. Everything okay, Joshua? Yeah, I said. A slow, dark smile spreading across my face. I signed my name on the dotted line, officially becoming a multimillionaire. Just getting ready for a family holiday. I had no intention of dropping the bomb at dinner. I really didn't. I was going to let them have their delusion. But fate has a funny way of forcing your hand. 2 days before the Christmas dinner, I was walking out of a coffee shop downtown when I heard shouting in a nearby alley. I glanced over and froze. It was Mason. He was backed against a brick wall by a large, aggressive man in a cheap suit. Parked right next to them was the gleaming silver Porsche my parents had bought him. I don't care about your fake promotion, Mason, the man growled, jabbing a finger into Mason's chest. Your margins collapsed. You owe us 50 grand by the end of the month. If you don't pay, we take the car, and we call the senior partners at your firm and tell them about your little gambling problem." Mason was pale, sweating profusely, begging for an extension. The golden child, the financial genius, was drowning in debt. His entire life was a carefully constructed lie. He was bleeding my parents dry to maintain the illusion of success. I stepped back into the shadows and walked away. The anger I felt wasn't hot. It was ice cold. My parents had sacrificed my future to fund a fraud. The upcoming Christmas dinner wasn't going to be a celebration anymore. It was going to be an execution. Christmas evening was bitterly cold, the kind of biting winter chill that seeps right into your bones. I drove my beat-up, 12-year-old Honda Civic to my parents' house in the suburbs. I parked on the street behind Uncle Wyatt's pristine SUV. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the warm, golden light spilling out of the living room windows. I could faintly hear the sound of holiday music and booming laughter. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a simple dark green sweater, dark jeans, and old boots. I hadn't bought a new watch. I hadn't rolled up in a luxury car. I came exactly as they expected me to be, the invisible, struggling younger brother. The contrast between who I was on the outside and the power I held in my bank account felt like a loaded weapon in my pocket. I walked up the driveway, the snow crunching under my boots, and pushed the front door open. The house hit me with a wall of heat and the smell of cinnamon and roasting meat. "Joshua, close the door, you're letting the draft in," my mother, Mary, called out from the hallway. She rushed over, wiping her hands on an apron. She gave me a stiff, quick hug that felt more like a pat down. "Take your boots off on the mat. Did you bring the extra ice?" "Yes, Mom. It's in the bag," I said. "Good. Put it in the kitchen. Mason and Jessica are already in the living room. Try to mingle, but don't corner Jessica with hospital stories. Okay? She gets squeamish. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't say it was good to see me. She just gave me a list of instructions and rushed back to the kitchen." I took a deep breath, slipped off my boots, and walked into the living room. The scene was sickeningly predictable. Mason stood by the fireplace, one hand casually resting on the mantel, holding a glass of amber liquid. He looked like an actor playing a wealthy businessman in a bad movie. Jessica sat on the sofa, smiling politely but looking slightly bored. Uncle Wyatt was pacing the rug, holding court as usual, while Luke, my obnoxious former coworker, nodded eagerly at everything Wyatt said. "Look who dragged himself out of the trenches," Luke sneered as soon as he saw me. He raised his beer bottle in a mocking salute. "Surprised you aren't covered in mystery fluids, man. They actually let you out of the ER on a holiday." I forced a tight smile. "Someone has to keep the place running, Luke." Uncle Wyatt clapped Mason heavily on the shoulder, nearly spilling Mason's drink. "Well, you chose the noble path, Joshua. Blue-collar work is important. But this guy right here," Wyatt pointed at Mason, "this guy is swimming with the sharks. Senior analyst. You should take notes, Joshua. Real wealth isn't made by punching a clock and collecting a salary. It's made by moving capital." Mason puffed his chest out, his ego expanding to fill the room. "It is just the beginning, Uncle Wyatt. The firm sees my value. The partners know who brings in the heavy hitters." I looked at Mason, remembering the sheer terror on his face in that alleyway 2 days ago. He was a spectacular liar. He was 50 grand in the hole to dangerous people, his margins had collapsed, and he was standing here soaking up their worship like a sponge. The urge to rip the mask off his face right then was overwhelming, but I held back. I needed the audience to be seated. I needed the stage to be perfectly set. "Congratulations on the promotion, Mason," I said smoothly. "Sounds like a lot of pressure." Mason smirked, swirling his drink. "Pressure is a privilege, little brother. Not everyone is built for it. Some people are built to follow orders, some are built to give them." "Dinner is ready," my mother chimed from the dining room, saving me from having to respond. We moved to the dining room. The table was meticulously set. The seating arrangement, as always, was a physical manifestation of the family hierarchy. Mason and Jessica were placed dead center, flanked by my parents on either side. Wyatt and Luke sat across from them. And me? I was placed at the very end of the table, right next to the kitchen door. The servants' quarters. Easy access to clear the plates and fetch the gravy boat. We sat down. The food was passed around. The wine was poured. My father stood up, tapping his knife against his crystal wine glass to demand silence. He raised his glass high, looking down the table at Mason with a level of immense pride I had never experienced. "I want to make a toast," Matthew said, his voice thick with emotion. "To Mason. Son, you have always been a driven young man. You understand what it takes to succeed in this brutal world. When your mother and I helped you with that Porsche, we knew it was an investment in a bright future. This promotion is just the validation of what we always knew. You are destined for greatness. We couldn't be prouder of the man you have become. Here, here," Uncle Wyatt boomed, raising his glass. Everyone clapped. Mason beamed, soaking it in. He clinked his glass with my father's, drank deeply, and then leaned back in his chair. He felt invincible. He felt like a king. And like any arrogant king, he immediately looked for someone to look down upon. His eyes drifted down the length of the table and locked onto me. The fake, magnanimous smile faded from his lips, replaced by a cruel, calculated smirk. He was ready to put on a show for his fiancée and his admiring audience. He was ready to step on me to make himself feel taller. "So, Joshua," Mason started, his voice projecting clearly over the soft holiday music playing in the background. "Still pulling those brutal double shifts? Still eating stale crackers from the vending machine?" And that was the exact moment the storm began. Fan 5. Chao treo su that bung no so tu du kien. 1502. I stopped chewing. I placed my fork down on the porcelain plate with a soft clink. I looked at Mason. "The shifts are long, Mason, but the work matters," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Luke snickered, leaning over to Wyatt. "Matters to the hospital's bottom line, maybe. Guy makes pennies to clean up messes." Mason chuckled, emboldened by his backup. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You really need to get out of that grind, little brother. I am serious. Maybe I can pull some strings, get you an entry-level interview at my firm. You would have to take some business courses, maybe learn how to dress the part, but I could vouch for you." My father nodded in agreement, slicing his ham. "Listen to your brother, Joshua. Nursing is a solid, practical job. Pays a salary. But Mason is talking about a career. You have always been our practical kid. The one we never have to worry about. But you should aim higher." "Yeah. But what about that app?" Mason pushed, his eyes gleaming with malice. He wasn't trying to help. He was trying to humiliate me in front of Jessica. "The medical data project. Are you still asking the universe to manifest $1 million? Did you finally give up on that? Or are you still wasting your life on it? Honestly, how is your little worthless business going?" The entire table went quiet, waiting for my usual response. They expected me to lower my eyes. They expected me to mumble an excuse, swallow my pride, and let Mason have his victory. Instead, I reached for my water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. I looked Mason dead in the eye. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the surgical precision of a doctor delivering a fatal diagnosis. "I am not manifesting anything anymore, Mason," I said. "And I didn't give up on it." Mason let out a loud, theatrical laugh, tossing his head back. "Right. Okay, Mr. CEO. Did you find an idiot to invest in it? How much did your little worthless business go for?" I let the silence stretch for one agonizing second. $170 million. The laughter died in Mason's throat like he had been choked. The silence that slammed into the dining room was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum of sound. My father's hand froze mid-air, his knife hovering over his plate. My mother's mouth parted slightly, all the blood draining from her face until her skin looked like ash. Uncle Wyatt blinked rapidly, looking confused, like I had suddenly spoken a foreign language. Luke stopped chewing. Mason's jaw hung open. He stared at me, his eyes darting back and forth across my face, desperately searching for the smirk that would tell him this was a joke. What did you say? Mason whispered. His voice was completely devoid of its usual arrogant bass. It sounded thin and fragile. I sold Pulse Link to Apex Medical Solutions 3 weeks ago, I stated clearly, my voice ringing out in the dead silence. The acquisition cleared. The funds are in my accounts. I retained equity in the parent company, and I am stepping away from the ER to manage a new healthcare investment fund. Mason pushed his chair back violently. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the floor. Bullshit, he yelled, his face suddenly flushing a dark, angry red. You are full of it. You are lying. You are sitting there in a cheap sweater, driving that piece of garbage Honda. You do not have that kind of money. Wealth isn't loud, Mason, I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. Only debt is loud. I saw him physically flinch at the word debt. The blood drained out of his flushed face. I don't believe you, Uncle Wyatt stammered, trying to regain control of the room. People don't just magically make hundreds of millions of dollars without anyone knowing. It takes lawyers, it takes structural audits. My lawyer is Julian Vance from Vance and Sterling, I interrupted smoothly. And yes, the audits were exhausting. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and unlocked it with Face ID. I opened the secure banking app, navigated to the primary holding account, and set the phone face up on the table. I placed my finger on it and slid it down the polished mahogany directly to my father. My father looked down. He stared at the glowing screen. He blinked hard, once, twice, as if trying to clear away a hallucination. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed heavily. The numbers on the screen were undeniable. 9 digits. Generational wealth. My God! My father choked out. His voice was barely a breath. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute terror and incomprehension. He looked like a man who had just realized he had been worshipping a puddle while ignoring the ocean. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. Just as my father opened his mouth to speak, my phone lit up with an incoming call, buzzing loudly against the wood. The caller ID flashed in bright white letters. Mr. Carter, Apex CEO. I reached over, picked up the phone, and hit the speaker button. Joshua, Mr. Carter's booming, cheerful voice echoed through the silent dining room. I know it is Christmas, and I shouldn't be bothering you, but I just wanted to call and wish my favorite young billionaire in training a happy holiday. The board is thrilled with the server transition this week. We are so lucky to have you on the team, son. I looked directly at Mason as I spoke. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Merry Christmas to you too. I am actually at dinner with my family right now. I will call you next week to finalize the quarter projections. Enjoy the family time, Joshua. You have earned it more than anyone. Take care. I hit end call. The beep echoed loudly. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the sound of a carefully constructed family hierarchy collapsing into dust. This is the exact moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my life and shattered their toxic illusion. Thank you for staying with me this far. You are amazing. Please help me out by liking the video and dropping a 1 in the comments to let me know you are still here. It helps more people find this story, and it tells me my experiences actually matter to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to share the rest of this journey. My mother was the first to break the heavy, suffocating silence. Her hands were shaking so violently that her bracelets clattered together. Joshua, she stammered, her voice high-pitched, strained, and entirely fake. Joshua, honey, why didn't you tell us? We are your family. We would have thrown a party. We would have celebrated. We are so incredibly proud of you. I looked at her. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt an overwhelming sense of pity. Proud of me? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Mom, You didn't even ask me how my shift was when I walked in the door tonight. You didn't tell me about this dinner. You sent a group text celebrating Mason. When I sat at this table 20 minutes ago, I was a punchline. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you are proud of me now just because you saw my bank account. Uncle Wyatt, ever the opportunist, cleared his throat loudly, trying to shift the narrative back to his comfort zone. Well, now, Joshua, let's be reasonable. You kept this very quiet. You can't blame us for not knowing. But this changes things. With that kind of capital, we need to get you a financial advisor immediately. We need to look at family investments, set up a trust, maybe buy some commercial real estate. I already have an entire team of financial advisors, Wyatt. I cut him off, my eyes locking onto his and freezing him in place. And my capital will never touch your hands. Ever. Your advice is exactly what drove this family into a ditch of delusion. Mason was breathing heavily, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles were white. You planned this, he hissed, his voice vibrating with pure rage and deep-seated panic. You came here specifically to humiliate me, to ruin my night in front of Jessica. I came here to eat dinner, Mason, I replied coldly. You humiliated yourself. You are the one who brought up my worthless business. You wanted an audience to watch you step on me. I just answered your question. I turned my attention away from him and focused entirely on my parents. 2 years ago, I said, my voice rising slightly, filling every corner of the room, I sat at your kitchen island and begged you to co-sign a $30,000 loan. I showed you the data. I told you it was going to work. You told me it was a gamble. You told me nursing was my backup plan. You looked me in the eye and refused. My father swallowed hard, looking down at his plate. And the very next day, I continued, pointing a finger directly at my father. You drained a college fund to buy him a Porsche. You actively bet against me to fund his ego. Jessica, sitting next to Mason, suddenly shifted. She looked horrified. She turned slowly to look at Mason. You told me you bought that Porsche with your end-of-year bonus, she said, her voice trembling with realization. Mason looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The disgust on her face was palpable. She was realizing the man she was about to marry was a fraud. You didn't just ignore me, I said, looking back at my parents. You poured all your money, your love, and your pride into the illusion of a golden child. And how is that working out? I looked at Mason, letting a cold, mocking smile touch my lips. How are the margins, Mason? Have the debt collectors stopped ambushing you in alleys outside coffee shops? Are you going to be able to pay back that 50 grand before they call the senior partners at your firm? Mason's head snapped up. Pure, unadulterated terror exploded in his eyes. The blood drained completely from his face. He realized I knew everything. He realized his entire fake life, his carefully constructed facade of the wealthy, successful older brother, was entirely exposed in front of the woman he loved and the parents who worshipped him. My parents looked between us, utterly confused, terrified, and heartbroken. The shiny veneer of their perfect family was shattering into a million pieces right on top of the Christmas turkey. I am done, I said. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. The invisible weight I had carried my entire life was gone. I am done being the background noise. I am done being the punchline to your jokes. My father stood up quickly, reaching a trembling hand out toward me. Joshua, please, do not do this. Sit down. Let's talk about this like a family. You are upset and maybe we made some mistakes, but you don't need to overreact. This is not an overreaction, Dad, I said, grabbing my winter coat from the back of the chair and sliding my arms into it. This is a boundary. You do not ask me for money. You do not ask me to bail him out when his creditors finally come knocking. If you ever want to have access to my life again, you will learn to respect me. And you will apologize. Not for tonight, for the last 28 years. I didn't wait for a response. I turned my back on the stunned, pathetic silence of the dining room. I walked down the hallway, past the framed photos of Mason holding his plastic trophies, and opened the front door. The freezing winter air hit my face like a splash of cold water. I stepped out into the snow, walked to my rusted, 12-year-old Honda Civic, got in, and started the engine. As I drove away from the house, leaving the shattered pieces of their delusions far behind me, I realized something profound. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had built my own. In the weeks following that explosive Christmas dinner, my family did exactly what I expected them to do. They went completely dark. There were no frantic phone calls, no passive-aggressive text messages in the family group chat, no sudden visits to my apartment. At first, the silence felt strange. It felt like standing in a house right after a massive storm had blown the roof off. You can smell the rain, you can see the wreckage, but the wind has finally stopped screaming in your ears. I didn't reach out to them. I had drawn my line in the sand, and I was perfectly fine letting them stare at it from the other side. Instead, I threw myself entirely into my new reality. I worked my final shift in the ER on the second week of January. Walking out of those sliding glass doors for the last time was a surreal experience. I had spent years of my life in that building, fighting exhaustion, surviving on vending machine coffee, and accepting a modest salary because I believed in the work. Handing over my badge to the charge nurse felt like shedding an old skin. Dr. Gabriel shook my hand, gave me a rare, genuine smile, and told me not to forget the people on the ground now that I was flying in the clouds. I promised him I wouldn't. I took the capital from the PulseLink acquisition and partnered with Elijah to launch a new healthcare technology investment fund. We moved into a sleek, sunlit office in the financial district. For the first time in my life, I was sitting in a leather chair behind a heavy oak desk, making decisions that dictated millions of dollars. But more importantly, I was finally having daily conversations with people who respected my intellect. They didn't see me as the quiet, invisible younger brother. They saw me as the founder who revolutionized ER logistics. But no matter how much money is in your bank account, unresolved family trauma does not just magically disappear. You carry it with you into your new offices, your new relationships, and your quiet moments alone. I realized quickly that if I didn't deal with the ghosts of my past, they would eventually haunt my future. So, I did something the old Joshua would have never considered. I hired a therapist. My therapist was a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Eris. I sat on her comfortable gray sofa week after week, unpacking 28 years of being the scapegoat in a family that worshipped a false idol. We talked about my father's dismissive attitude. We talked about my mother's blind complicity. We talked about how being the ignored kid is a slow, dripping kind of psychological poison. It makes you doubt your own reality. It makes you feel like you have to perform miracles just to earn the basic human decency of a conversation. But Dr. Eris also made me look at the other side of the coin. She made me look at Mason. When a family designates a golden child, Dr. Eris told me one afternoon, they are not doing that child a favor. They are setting a trap. They tie the child's entire worth to their achievements, their image, and their status. They build a pedestal so high that the golden child becomes utterly terrified of falling. They will lie, cheat, and destroy themselves just to maintain the illusion, because they believe if they fail, the love will disappear. I didn't fully understand the weight of her words until the middle of February. It was a Tuesday night. I was sitting in my apartment, reviewing some legal documents Julian, my lawyer, had sent over regarding a new startup we were looking to acquire. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse. My phone buzzed on the kitchen island. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID said Mason. I stared at it for a long time. The phone vibrated against the marble countertop, demanding an answer. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. Part of me wanted to cut the cord entirely. But a deeper, quieter part of me remembered the sheer terror I had seen on his face at the Christmas table. I picked up the phone and accepted the call. "Hello?" I said, my voice neutral and guarded. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Then, a voice cracked in the darkness. "Joshua, It didn't sound like Mason. It didn't sound like the arrogant senior analyst who drove a Porsche and mocked my career. It sounded like a terrified, broken kid. "What is going on, Mason?" I asked. He let out a dry, bitter laugh that ended in a sob. "You were right. You were right about all of it. The debt is loud, Joshua. It is so damn loud." He started talking, and once he started, he couldn't stop. The dam had completely burst. He told me everything. The men in the alleyway had not been bluffing. When Mason missed the payment deadline at the end of January, the loan sharks made good on their threat. They didn't break his legs. They did something much worse for a man whose entire life was built on image. They called the senior partners at his investment firm. They exposed his massive, unsecured debts. They exposed his reckless gambling on high-risk margin calls. The firm, terrified of the liability and the bad optics, fired him immediately. They escorted him out of the building with a cardboard box in front of his entire department. The promotion my parents had thrown a holiday dinner to celebrate was gone in a matter of minutes. But the dominoes didn't stop falling there. When Jessica found out about the firing, the gambling, and the $50,000 debt to dangerous people, she packed her bags. She realized the man she was engaged to was a hollow shell. She called off the wedding, handed the ring back, and walked out the door. She left. Mason cried into the phone, his voice echoing in what sounded like an empty room. "She told me she couldn't marry a liar. I guess I should be glad we didn't actually tie the knot yet. A messy divorce and fighting over custody of future kids would have been a nightmare. But God, Joshua, I have nothing. They took the Porsche. The bank is foreclosing on the condo. I am completely wiped out." I listened to him cry. A year ago, I might have felt a spark of vindictive joy. I might have celebrated his downfall. But sitting there in my quiet apartment, listening to my brother's life collapse into rubble, I just felt incredibly sad. Dr. Eris was right. The pedestal had shattered, and the fall had broken every bone in his ego. "Why are you calling me, Mason?" I asked softly. "You have Mom and Dad. They will bail you out. They always do." "I can't tell them," Mason whispered, his voice shaking with pure dread. "You don't understand, Joshua. You don't know what it is like. They look at me like I am some kind of god. If I tell them I am a failure, if I tell them I lost everything, I lose them too. I am nothing without that image. I don't know who I am without it. You are a guy who made terrible choices because you were trying to impress people who only love a fantasy," I said firmly. "You have to tell them, Mason. The truth is the only way out of the hole you dug." He hung up shortly after that. I didn't offer him money. I didn't offer to pay off the loan sharks. I held the boundary I had set at Christmas. He had to face the consequences of his own actions. But the universe, it seemed, was not quite finished balancing the scales of our family karma. The final, crushing blow came 3 weeks later. It was a Sunday morning. I was at a local coffee shop, reviewing a portfolio, when my mother called. She didn't say hello. She was hyperventilating, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic, hysterical rush. "Joshua, you have to come. Please, you have to meet us. Something terrible has happened. We need help. We need a lawyer. Please, Joshua." Her panic was so raw, so unscripted, that I immediately left my coffee on the table, got into my car, and drove to the address she gave me. It was a cheap, rundown diner on the outskirts of the city. I walked in and found my parents sitting in a corner booth. They looked like they had aged 10 years in 3 months. My father's face was ashen, his shoulders slumped. My mother was clutching a thick manila folder to her chest, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I slid into the booth across from them. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. My father couldn't even look at me. He just stared at the greasy tabletop. My mother pushed the manila folder across the table with trembling hands. "It's Uncle Wyatt," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, legal notices, and copies of wire transfers. It took me less than 5 minutes of scanning the documents to piece together the absolute catastrophe. Uncle Wyatt, the financial guru, the man who constantly preached about securing the inheritance and building wealth, was a massive fraud. For the last 2 years, Wyatt had been running a quiet Ponzi scheme, targeting his own friends and family. He had convinced my parents that the stock market was too volatile and that he had exclusive access to a high-yield commercial real estate syndicate. He told us it was a sure thing. My father whispered, his voice hollow. He told us it would double our retirement. We trusted him, Joshua. He is my brother. Wyatt had convinced them to take out a massive second mortgage on their house. He had convinced them to liquidate their entire retirement portfolio. He even took the remaining balance of the college fund they hadn't spent on Mason's Porsche. They wired hundreds of thousands of dollars into a shell company Wyatt controlled. And yesterday, Uncle Wyatt had vanished. His office was empty. His phone was disconnected. The authorities were already involved, and the devastating truth was clear. The money was gone. The syndicate didn't exist. Wyatt had taken their entire life savings, mortgaged their home to the hilt, and fled the state. The bank sent a notice, my mother cried, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her grip was desperate, clawing. They are going to take the house, Joshua. We have nothing left. We can't pay the mortgage. We can't even pay the utility bills next month. You have to help us. You have that money from your company. You have millions. A few $100,000 is nothing to you. You can save the house. You can hire a private investigator to find Wyatt. I looked down at her hands gripping mine. I looked at my father, who was finally raising his eyes to meet mine. His expression a mixture of profound shame and desperate hope. This was the ultimate test. This was the moment where the old Joshua would have folded. The old Joshua would have written a check to buy their love, to finally be the hero, to finally hear them say they were proud of him. I could have paid off their mortgage with a fraction of the interest sitting in my accounts. I could have fixed their entire lives with a single phone call to Julian. But I remembered the kitchen island. I remembered asking them to co-sign a tiny loan to help me build my dream. I remembered my father telling me I was a gamble, while he handed thousands of dollars to Mason to project a fake image. I remembered Uncle Wyatt sitting in our living room, mocking my career, while my parents nodded in agreement. I gently, but firmly, pulled my hands out of my mother's grasp. I am so incredibly sorry that Wyatt did this to you, I said softly, and I meant it. Watching your parents realize they have been betrayed by their own blood is a terrible thing to witness. But I am not paying your debts. My mother froze. Her tears stopped instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending shock. What? Joshua, what are you saying? We will be homeless. We are your parents. I told you at Christmas, Mom, I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of absolute finality. I set a boundary. You do not ask me for money. You do not use me as an emergency fund when the people you actually believed in fail you. My father's face hardened, a flash of his old defensive pride rising up. We are family, Joshua. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime. Are you really going to sit there and watch us lose our home out of spite? Because we didn't give you a loan for an app? It is not about the loan, Dad, I replied, leaning forward, holding his gaze until he looked away. It is about the fact that you never respected me. You let Wyatt sit in your house and disrespect me for years because you thought he was a genius. You enabled Mason's delusions because you wanted a trophy son. You made reckless financial decisions based on ego and greed. And now the bill has come due. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a business card for a reputable bankruptcy attorney I knew. I slid it across the table. I will not pay off the mortgage and I will not fund your lifestyle, I said clearly. Call this lawyer. He specializes in elder bankruptcy and fraud recovery. He will help you navigate the foreclosure. He will help you salvage whatever is left. I will pay his retainer fee. That is the extent of my financial involvement. My mother started sobbing again, a deep, wailing sound of true despair. My father just stared at the business card like it was a death sentence. You have to face the reality of what you built, I told them, standing up from the booth. You chose Wyatt's advice. You chose Mason's image. Now you have to live with the results. I walked out of the diner, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their own poor choices. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. My chest ached, and my hands were shaking slightly as I gripped the steering wheel of my car. But as I drove back toward the city, the ache slowly faded, replaced by a profound, unshakable sense of peace. I had not acted out of cruelty. I had acted out of respect for myself. I had broken the cycle. It has been nearly 2 years since that Christmas dinner. The passage of time has a funny way of stripping away the noise and leaving only the absolute truth. My parents lost the house. The bank foreclosed on the property they had lived in for 30 years. It was a brutal, humbling experience for them. They had to sell off most of their furniture, auction the remaining valuables, and move into a small, 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The bankruptcy process wiped out the remaining fragments of their pride. Uncle Wyatt was eventually caught by federal authorities trying to cross the border. He is currently serving a lengthy sentence in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. There was no secret inheritance. There was no hidden wealth, just a trail of ruined lives. As for Mason, the fall from the pedestal nearly broke him. Without the fancy job, without the luxury car, and without Jessica, he had to look in the mirror and figure out who he actually was. For a long time, he was bitter. He blamed the world. But eventually, the hunger fades, and you have to start walking again. About 6 months ago, my assistant buzzed my office phone. She told me there was a young man in the lobby asking for an application for our entry-level data entry position. She said his name was Mason. I walked out to the lobby. Mason was sitting in a plastic chair, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit he had probably bought at a discount store. He looked exhausted, older, and entirely stripped of his golden armor. He stood up nervously when he saw me. "Joshua," he said, swallowing hard. "I saw the posting online. I know I don't have the right background for medical tech, but I know how to run spreadsheets. I know how to work hard. I just need a chance to start over. I need a job." He wasn't demanding a position. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was asking for a chance to work at the absolute bottom of the ladder at a company I built. I looked at him for a long moment. I remembered the smirk at the dinner table. I remembered the endless insults. But I also saw a guy who had finally hit rock bottom and was trying to climb his way out with his own 2 hands. "The pay is terrible, Mason," I told him honestly. "You will be entering data for 10 hours a day. My managers are strict. Nobody here cares what your last name is. If you mess up, you will be fired." Mason nodded slowly. "I understand. I just want to work." I gave him the job. He has been there for 6 months. He keeps his head down, he eats his lunch at his desk, and he does the work. We are not best friends. We don't go out for beers after work. But when we pass each other in the hallway, there is a quiet nod of respect. The golden child is gone. In his place is just a man trying to rebuild his life. My relationship with my parents is complicated. We meet for coffee once a month. I do not go to their apartment, and they do not come to my penthouse. We sit in neutral territory. The conversations are careful, tentative. But for the first time in my entire life, when I speak, my father actually listens. When I talk about my day, my mother actually asks follow-up questions. The dynamic has fundamentally shifted. They know they cannot manipulate me. They know my presence in their life is a privilege, not a guarantee. It took losing everything for them to finally see the son who had been standing right in front of them the whole time. Looking back at the whole journey, the nights in the ER, the grueling hours coding, the brutal rejection, and the ultimate victory, I realized that the most valuable thing I gained wasn't the $170 million. The money bought me freedom, yes, but the real victory was finding my own voice. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, one educational lesson that you can carry into your own life, it is this: your value as a human being is not determined by whether or not your family recognizes it. We are conditioned to believe that our parents' approval is the ultimate metric of our worth. But sometimes, families are broken. Sometimes, they operate on toxic systems of favoritism, projecting their own insecurities onto their children. When you find yourself playing the role of the invisible child, the scapegoat, or the backup plan, you have to understand that their blindness does not erase your brilliance. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into their flawed narrative. Setting boundaries with your parents or siblings is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It is the only way to break generational cycles of emotional neglect. Stand up for your reality. Build your empire in the dark if you have to, because when you finally step into the light, the truth will be undeniable. You are enough exactly as you are, and you do not need their permission to succeed. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know what part of this journey resonated with you the most. What is your favorite takeaway from this whole mess? Leave your thoughts down below, or simply comment the word good, so I know that these lessons brought some value to your day. Stay strong, keep building, and never let anyone tell you that your dreams are just a backup plan.